Hello, my name is Michael Pedersen, and thank you for joining me today. We are in the risk management session of our project management professional training, and with that I'll go over the first slide that should be corresponding with my video. We are today going to present our learner objectives, the definition, discussion, application of risk management as it's defined in PMBOK, using some other sources as well. And what are the process groups, the literal definition, high-level use, interaction, and a recap of the objectives we learned. So when you think about risk management, and when I first started studying this, I thought it was very helpful for me because I tend to be a worrywart. And for those that are worrywarts, you know that you think about things that have not occurred yet, and it starts to boggle your mind, like, oh, what if this happened? What if that happened? So when we think about risk management, and when you're taking the PMBOK, the PMP certification exam, you'll see a lot of key words like if, may, might, unsure, uncertain, unknown, assume, assumption, all these listed. So those are key indicators that we're talking about risk management. And the great thing about risk management is we have a plan for identifying risks and dealing with them. So we have a plan and we have proactive responses should those events occur. So we're going to go over the different knowledge areas within risk management. There's the plan risk management, identify risks, perform qualitative risk analysis, perform quantitative risk analysis, plan risk responses, and control risks. So you'll see on the slide listed some of the key things that I'll go over. There's a lot of course, the ITTOs with the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. I'll try to stress and focus in on the ones that you're most likely to see on the exam. And before we get into the first process of plan risk management, I just wanted to point out, if you look at the knowledge areas and how they're listed for risk management, something really stands out, and that's that most of these are planning processes. All except the control risks are within the planning process group. So it's a lot of planning, analysis, identification, looking at what we need to do should events occur. So not much or not anything really in the way of initiating, executing, or closing. All planning and just one process in monitor control. So the first process group within plan risk management is plan risk management. And before we even get into that, we need to identify and define what is a risk, and that's an uncertain event with a positive or negative impact on project objectives, sometimes an opportunity if it's positive. So it's something that's unforeseen. This is different than issues, which are events that are occurring or already occurred, so something that's currently happening and has been identified. So that's a key difference, because when we're talking about issues, we're often in different process groups and knowledge areas outside of risk management, possibly change control. So when we're planning risk management, we're asking ourselves, how are we going to conduct the risk management plan? Not identifying the risks or analyzing or doing things specific, because we haven't identified them yet. We're just planning how are we going to do this. And when we think about that, we really have to keep in mind the needs of the stakeholders, like their risk appetite, how much uncertainty stakeholders can handle, and their risk tolerance, which is the degree of risk the stakeholders can withstand. And again, we're not identifying risks or risk responses during the risk management planning process. So our inputs to the risk management plan include the project management plan, project charter, stakeholder register, environmental factors, organizational process assets. And when we're looking at the tools and techniques, it's the analytical tools, expert judgment, and meetings. So the outputs of plan risk management are obviously the risk management plan. The risk management plan should include the methodologies, approaches, tools, data sources we're using for managing risks, roles and responsibilities, budgeting, timing, risk categories. And I'll point out on this slide there's a mistake. Well, I don't know if it's a mistake, but if you're looking at PMBOK version 5, they have on page 317 what's listed as a risk breakdown structure, and that's not what it looks like. So this is one that I found. You can find them online, but it's basically a hierarchical diagram similar to the work breakdown structure, but this is specific to risks. Also wanted to show an example of the probability and impact matrix and the scales used. So when we're planning for risk management, we want to look at what are our measures when we do go to identify risks. What's their impact or effect on the cost, time, scope, and quality of the project. So this shows an example of how those measures can be put into place in the risk management plan. So the second process within risk management is identify risks. And we have our inputs to the process, which include the risk management plan, the cost management plan, the schedule management plan, quality management plan, human resource management plan, and the scope baseline. So also activity cost estimations, activity duration estimates, stakeholder register, project documents, procurement documents, environmental factors, and organizational process assets. When we look at the tools and techniques for identifying risks, we're looking at documentation review, information gathering techniques, checklist analysis, diagramming, SWOT analysis, expert judgment. So all the tools that we're using in some of the other knowledge areas, we're using in identify risks. And for the output of identifying risk is the risk register. This is the single lone output of this process, and that is very important to remember because on the test, if they're talking about the risk register as it relates to an output, they're talking about identify risks, not plan risk management or any of the analysis. It's just identify risk. And I wanted to show an example of a risk register because there isn't one in PMBOK. So you can look up any of these online, but it's simply just a listing of the risk. And it varies depending on who created the risk register, but usually it will have some sort of action plan, some notation about the impact of that risk, maybe dates associated with it, whether action dates or date identified. So again, the risk register is the only output. It's the list of identified risks and risk responses. So the third process in risk management is perform qualitative risk analysis. And this is where we're really getting into the meat of risk management. We've developed the plan, we've identified risks, now it's time to analyze those risks from a qualitative and forthcoming quantitative perspective. The inputs for this process, perform qualitative risk analysis, is the risk management plan, the scope baseline, the risk register, which, if you remember, is the output of the identify risk process, environmental factors, organizational process assets. With the tools and techniques, the major one is the probability and impact matrix. So you'll see an example of this, and remember, risks can be both positive and negative, so they can be opportunities or threats to the organization. When we're looking at the probability of occurrence, that is shown on that vertical bar. So the higher up, the more probable or likely it is that that risk is going to occur. And then on that horizontal axis, you'll see what that impact's going to be. So in that dark area, those are the ones that are likely to occur and have a high impact on the project in some shape or form. So again, the probability and impact matrix is one of the major tools and techniques. Other tools and techniques include the risk data quality assessment, the risk categorization, risk urgency assessment, and expert judgment. The outputs of the performed qualitative risk analysis include risk register updates and update assumptions log updates. So the fourth process in risk management is perform quantitative risk analysis. So we've looked at planning risk management, identifying risk, performing qualitative risk analysis. This is the quantitative risk analysis process. And this may not always be conducted during a project due to the lack of sufficient data or resources. So it's possible that this process is skipped during projects in real life, but of course for the PMBOK and the PMP exam we need to go over what's entailed. So the inputs are the risk management plan, cost management plan, schedule management plan, risk register, environmental factors, and organizational process assets. So if you remember, during the qualitative risk analysis, the risk register is updated in some of these other plans possibly. The tools and techniques used for quantitative risk analysis include data gathering and representation techniques, quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques, and expert judgment. Under the quantitative, I do want to point out that we have the tornado diagram sensitivity analysis, which is used in some of the other processes or knowledge areas. And the modeling and simulation, Monte Carlo, which is normally a computer modeling tool. But the key one here is expected monetary value. And if you look on the slide where we've got an example of a rainstorm delay. So these are risks to the project, some of which could be positive, some negative. What is their probability and impact? We've talked about probability and impact. So when we look at expected monetary value, it's just the summation or sigma of all these risks and how they play out with the probability of occurrence and their impact. So for this example, we have a 25% risk of a storm delay that could have a negative $10,000 impact on the project. So the expected monetary value is simply 0.25 times 10,000, so negative 2,500. The material cost decline of 10% could have a positive impact and could be seen as an opportunity of $20,000 positive impact. So that 0.1 times 20,000 is a positive 2,000. And a labor dispute that has a 5% of a chance of occurrence for a negative $20,000 impact. So the expected monetary value is negative 1,000. And then we just sum those totals for a negative $1,500 impact. So those three risks together have a negative $1,500 impact. On the exam, what you'll typically see is maybe they will point out just one project and we're asked to look at what the expected monetary value is for a series of events occurring, or sometimes they will have you choose between two or more projects where you have to calculate the expected monetary value of all the risks associated, or maybe just one, with those different projects, and then which project should the team pursue, or which route should they take when they have to weigh their options between several projects. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just simple math, but it's really about making sure you understand what's being asked and how to calculate the EMV. And the outputs of performed quantitative risk analysis are the project document updates, probability analysis of the project, probability of achieving cost and time objectives, prioritized list of quantified risks, and trends in quantitative risk analysis results. So we're in the 5th of 6 processes within risk management. We've covered plan risk management, identify risk, perform qualitative risk analysis, and perform quantitative risk analysis. So now we're planning risk responses. We've done our analysis, we know how we need to be measuring the risk, we've identified them, and now we're looking at the responses. So the inputs to plan risk responses are the risk management plan and the risk register. There's a couple really key things to keep in mind when we plan risk responses, and that's knowing the difference between a known unknown and an unknown unknown and how they relate to the budget of the project. And this will come up on the exam. So if you remember under time management, we talked about the unknown unknowns. Actually, we talked more about the contingency reserves, excuse me. But when it comes to the known unknowns, these are risks that we've predicted and identified, and the contingency reserves within the budget should be used to address the known unknowns. For the unknown unknowns, these are risks that were not identified before they happen, so they're just events that occur. And for these, we use management reserves to address the unknown unknowns. For the tools and techniques for risk responses, there's a lot of questions on the PMP exam related to tools and techniques as they relate to risk responses. So there's strategies for negative risk responses and strategies for positive risk responses, contingent response strategies, and expert judgment. So we'll get into these, but the positive or the negative risk responses are ATM, avoid, transfer, mitigate. And for positive responses, we have C, SEE, share, exploit, enhance. The one response that's shared by both the positive and negative responses is accept. And we'll get into the contingent response strategies as well. These are really key areas, and that's why they're highlighted red, because you most likely will be tested on these in the exam. So there's, like I said, ATM, avoid, transfer, mitigate are strategies for negative responses. When we say avoid, we're talking about eliminating the threat of a risk by isolating the impact from the project objectives. So we're looking, we have a risk, and we can alter the objectives of the project. Add more funds, more time, do something to extend the scope, reduce the scope, so we're changing some parameter in the project to avoid the risk from occurring. Transferring the risks is shifting the impact of a risk to a third party. So if we buy insurance, now that insurer bears the cost. Should something happen, they have to pay out. Mitigate means we're reducing the negative impact of the risks. Examples, prototype backup resources, cross-training. So I love this, this image of avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept. And this comes from the Head First book. And in the first image, you'll see the gentleman walking away from the cliff. He's not even going to attempt to get off, walk or jump off the cliff. So he's avoiding. Transfer, here he's paying somebody else to jump off the cliff. And mitigate, we're going to put a trampoline down so that he's going to lessen the impact when he falls off the cliff. And accept is just bearing it, and I guess he's going to hit his head in this picture. So the strategies for positive risk responses, again, are C, SEE, share, enhance, exploit. So with share, we're talking about granting ownership to a third party, so they also are able to partake in that positive impact. Enhance is increasing the probability of an opportunity occurring. And exploit is eliminating uncertainty to ensure opportunity occurs. when I took the PMP exam, I saw more related to the negative risk responses than positive, but it's good to know the positive ones. And the outputs of the plan risk responses are project document updates. I'll make a few notes here, and I have them in red, about the contingency plans, fallback plans, residual risks, and secondary risk. So when we have our risk plan and we come up with responses to those risks, those are referred to as contingency plans. And in the event that our contingency plan doesn't work, those are referred to as fallback plans. If something occurs and we didn't have a plan at all, then we're talking about a workaround. So just so you're clear, I mean, it's not, those are three separate things. So contingency is our plan to a response. Fallback is in the event that response doesn't work, what's our backup plan, fallback plan. And then the workaround is just kind of an ad hoc response to something that occurs that we didn't foresee. Residual risks are risks that are expected to remain even after we've implemented something to, mitigate or avoid a negative risk. A residual risk is going to occur or is expected to remain. And a secondary risk is like we put in a response and now another risk arose. And that's pretty much it with the outputs as described here. So the last process, the sixth of risk management, is the control risks. And this comes after we planned for risk management, we've identified the risk, we've performed our qualitative risk analysis, we performed our quantitative risk analysis, we planned our risk responses. So in control risks, this is what I would consider a less important, but still important, but maybe not as important as some of the other processes within risk management. So really during control risk, we're looking at how effectively we've controlled our risks and performed against those risks as they've been identified and we've responded to them. So this is kind of all after the fact work, after we've done all those other processes. The inputs to the control risk process include the project management plan, risk register, work performance data, work performance reports. So we're looking at the reports, and that's a key thing if you're answering questions in the exam. If we're looking at reports, this has already occurred and we're measuring how effectively we've performed against the plan. The tools and techniques in control risks include the risk reassessment, risk audits, variance and trend analysis, technical performance measurement, reserve analysis, and meetings. So again, comparing plan to actual and targets to actual, how well did we perform as we addressed risks? And the outputs of control risks are work performance information, change requests, project management, plan updates, project document updates, organizational process assets updates. And with that, I thank you for joining me today to cover risk management.